Hello students, we will now begin with Module 5 which deals with emerging torts. Before we begin discussion on Module 5, let us go back and look what have we studied in Module 4. Module 4 basically consisted of the kind of liabilities. There were strict and absolute liabilities which were discussed. We've also discussed vicarious liability in detail. The module also consisted of judicial and extrajudicial remedies. We have not taken up those topics separately as a presentation because in the course of discussion of various torts, either in the classroom or in those presentations and video lectures given by me and Abhishek sir, we've already discussed certain remedies which are peculiar to the different kind of torts, be those be remedies which are judicial or extrajudicial. For example, for every tort we've discussed how damages would be calculated. In certain cases we've discussed that injunctions would be given by the court. In case of trespass to persons, I have discussed how self-help, habeas corpus and damages would be given. Similarly, in case of trespass to property, Abhishek sir has discussed certain remedies. So these remedies have already been discussed with you in details while we were discussing those specific torts. So a separate discussion of that has not been done by us, and the discussions were done as we were discussing various torts. Now let us move on to discuss the next topic. Today I will be dealing with cyber torts and sexual harassment as a tort. Abhishek sir in his next presentations would deal with constitutional tort and environmental tort. So let us now begin with the discussion of what cyber tort basically is. We've already understood that a tort is a negligent or an intentional act which does any injury to somebody, right? Now there has to be a damage which is done. That damage can be either physical or it can be a damage which is not physical, right? We've already understood the concepts of injuria sine damnum and damnum sine injuria, and we know which one of them is responsible to get damages. Now what do you mean by cyber tort? Cyber tort is nothing but a tort which is done over cyberspace. It is basically a species of traditional or conventional torts where either the computer is an object or subject of constituting the tort. So cyber tort is something which is an extension of a conventional tort. It is not something that is path-breaking or something that is extraordinary here. We've already understood that torts have evolved with the evolution of time. Earlier there was no strict liability, then the concept of strict liability came in. It was further evolved to have developed into absolute liability in certain cases. The object here is not to classify or bring out essentials of what a cyber tort is. The object of this discussion is to bring out a topic of discussion that whether cyber wrongs can also be considered as torts. So here there is no definitive answer of a yes or no. Rather, this entire module will consist of discussions of whether certain wrongs can be called torts or not. So the first one here is cyber tort. We've already understood the concept of ubija sibi remedium, which says where there is a right, there is a remedy. Or where there is a wrong which is done, you have a remedy which is available to you. Now, in case of cyber torts, there is a wrong which is committed to you. The medium is something that is changed. The medium becomes online medium, or the cyberspace is the place where those torts are committed to you. So these torts can either be trespass. It can either be trespass to body or trespass to property. They can be defamation which is done. So let us look at certain torts and let us look at certain cyber torts and relate them, that whether they can fit into certain categories of torts or not. Now you would say that there is an IT Act 2000 which is already in place, and why do we need cyber torts as such? We've already discussed while we were discussing the distinction between crime and tort that there are already certain wrongs which are placed under the wrong of crimes, which are already crimes, yet they are constituted and they are considered under torts as well. Why? Because the degree of severity also differs. Also, for some statutory wrongs to be tried by the court, those essentials have to be met. So if the IT Act says cyber stalking means this, you will have to fulfill those essentials. However, if we bring cyber stalking under tort, and if we prove that you have a right and it has been breached, you can go to the court under a tort. You can prove that yes, there has been some damage done to you and you have a remedy. And if you bring it under some tort, you might be able to get those remedies, right? So the concept here is to discuss whether cyber wrongs can also be torts. Now let us look at certain examples to discuss and to understand, can we put cyber wrongs into the categories of torts or not. Now let us try and classify these cyber wrongs under various torts. Let us look at whether they fit under the categories of torts or not. Trespass to chattel includes probably the email spams that you get in your mailbox, or the various advertisements that come in your mailbox without any authorization. So for example, if you put in your ID somewhere, you have spams which come and cloud your computer. These might include a trespass to your chattel because there's an unauthorized intervention in your property. There is a direct intervention and an unauthorized intervention. Now if somebody steals your domain name in cases of businesses, or if they steal your information online, this might include conversion because this is taking away the right of you to use your property, or it interferes with your right to use your property. For example, if you put your card details somewhere and it is taken away, now that might interfere with your right to use your details because you might have to get that card blocked and get a new one issued. So there's a wrong which is committed to you. And these are certain examples. Now let us look at what stalking is. Stalking is basically to follow, stalk a person, or to constantly look at what he's doing and what he's not doing, right? Cyber stalking basically is the use of internet to stalk a person. Now this might result in a harm to that person, or it might result in scaring that person mentally. You are following every action of that person, and this might intimidate that person. Now cyber stalking can result in various other torts as well. For example, if you constantly communicate with a person online, if you keep mailing them or messaging them on Facebook or WhatsApp or for some other place, this might be a cause of nuisance. If you stalk them, you look at their information, you find out something and you disclose it, or if you tell it to somebody, this might result in defamation. So cyber stalking might lead to various torts, right? So this is one example of how cyber stalking can be correlated to a tort. The next type of cyber wrong is cyber defamation. We've already understood what defamation is. To go back and look at it, it means an act of imputing any person with the intent to lower the person in the estimation of right-thinking members of the society, or to cause him to be shunned, or to expose him to hatred, contempt, or ridicule. Now, cyber defamation basically means defaming somebody on the virtual medium, on the online medium. So it has all essentials of defamation, just that the publication is now on an online medium or a virtual medium. So here, this completely falls into the concept of torts. So it is not difficult to correlate cyber defamation to a tort and bring it under the category of tort, right? Cyber obscenity, which basically means posting obscene content of somebody online, will also be a subcategory of this crime, that is cyber defamation. Why? Because it would result in somebody being imputed or harming somebody's character online. Hence, this is also something which would fall under cyber defamation. It is not very difficult to correlate cyber defamation to a tort of defamation because the essentials are same, and hence here there is no confusion, and this could easily fall under the category of a cyber tort. Vandalism in the conventional sense means to destroy or damage somebody's property. When it comes to cyber vandalism, it means to deliberately do any harm to somebody's computer or virtual machine. Now, this can be done either by way of cyber attack, that is, either by way of viruses being infected or by way of damaging somebody's online website through hacking it. All this comes under vandalism. Now, what happens in case of cyber vandalism is that you do not physically touch or damage that property. Yet, it can be a kind of trespass to property because there's an interference in the property. It is a direct interference and something that damages the property. So, affecting somebody's website or doing a virus attack on somebody's computer would all fall under the case of cyber vandalism. Here, because you destroy that property in the virtual space and rendering it unusable by the person. It does a damage to that person's property and hence comes under such category. Now, in India, the Information Technology Act of 2000 deals with various cyber wrongs, and it deals with hacking, cyber piracy, and various such torts, cyber obscenity, cyber defamation. All this is dealt with under the IT Act. The essence of discussing the concept of cyber tort is to understand that as the law evolves, and we've understood that the law of torts is not static, it keeps evolving with the evolution of society. These wrongs can also be considered under the tort domain. So, all these are various examples of how you can connect the various cyber wrongs to torts and how these wrongs can also fall under the domain of torts. Yes, we do have a legislation like in the case of other torts also, but here the essence is to bring out a different concept of cyber torts to enable you to think that yes, there are certain other wrongs also apart from the general conventional wrongs which can also fall under torts. So this is one example of cyber torts, that is cyber wrongs. The wrongs remain same, just the medium changes. So change of medium does not mean that this cannot be brought under the domain of torts. And hence, these cyber torts can be brought under the category of trespass to persons, trespass to property, nuisance. They can also be cases of negligence. And we can correlate cyber wrongs to torts. Now, after having discussed cyber torts, let us move at a different field which is now emerging to be considered in torts as well, that is sexual harassment. Now, what do you mean by sexual harassment? Sexual harassment is defined as an act which includes such unwelcome sexual determined behavior as physical contact, advances, sexually colored remarks, showing pornography, and sexual demands, whether by words or by actions. What is essential here to notice that these need not be any physical acts per se, but certain movements also, or words also, or actions also. These are also something which constitute sexual harassment. So if somebody makes any bad comments towards somebody or does any act, right, which is such that is perceived by the person to have some effect on them or is some kind of a sexual advance, that is considered to be sexual harassment, right? So it need not be a physical touch or a feel to be a harassment case. It can be either by way of words or by certain intended acts which show that it is a sexual harassment or it is an act to harass somebody. Now, after having discussed that these need not be either touch, they can include touch or feels as well, but they can be by means of words also. So it is clear that this falls under the domain which we've already studied, that is trespass to persons. Why? Because trespass to persons is an unintended or an direct invasion in your body's privacy or the security of your person. Sexual harassment is a genesis or a genus or a species of one of these acts, right? So sexual harassment directly falls under the tort of trespass to persons. Like in case of cyber torts, we had to identify whether they fall or not. It is clear in sexual harassment that it directly falls under the tort of trespass to persons. Now it can either be by way of assault. What are the essentials of assault? there should be some act which immediately threatens the person, that there might be some force used. In case of sexual harassment, also there are words or there are acts which intend that the person might use certain force against that person or do some unintended or unwelcomed act towards that person, right? So assault can be by way of words and actions, right? So any word or any bad comment or any physical movement that is done in an unwelcoming way can constitute a sexual harassment and also falls under the domain of sexual harassment. Also falls in the domain of assault. So these two are intermingled. So sexual harassment can be by way of assault. If somebody uses force on somebody else, a female, and or somebody uses any unintended force to outrage the modesty, for example, or to do any unwelcomed act, it directly falls under the domain of battery. So any physical act to harass somebody in a sexual way becomes or comes under the domain of battery. The last is false imprisonment. Now, can sexual harassment fall under the domain of false imprisonment? For example, if you use any unintended words or any statements or actions to outrage somebody's modesty, or you stop, totally restrain that person from moving in any direction, that with the intention that you might outrage the person's modesty, then these two become intermingled. Sexual harassment cannot per se be equated to false imprisonment, because false imprisonment is totally restraining somebody's movement. However, if you do it with an intention or with acts so as to show that you might harass that person, and then you totally restrain that person's movement, then you can, this act can also fall under the domain of sexual harassment. So sexual harassment in simple words is not that complicated if it comes under the domain of torts. Why? Because these directly fall under trespass to persons, right? They directly interfere with somebody's bodily privacy or security or liberty. So these wrongs directly fall under the tort of trespass to persons. Now, in the case of Chairman Railway Board and others versus Mrs. Chandrima Das, this is a 2002 Supreme Court case. This is a case where the court also recognized that sexual harassment can also fall in the domain of torts. What happened in this case was a Bangladeshi national came to Howrah station to catch a train for Ajmer. Being new to the busy railway station, she was misled by a few employees and was taken to a room in the railway station. That was some guest house which was already booked by them. She was raped there by the employees, and later she was again taken to some other house and raped again. Now there was a lot of hue and cry raised by the female, and she was rescued by the police. Now, Miss Chandrima Das, she was a practicing advocate, and she filed a public interest litigation to claim compensation for the victim. The court here in the High Court granted 10 lakh of compensation to be paid to the victim by the Union of India, right? This went up to appeal, and the Supreme Court reaffirmed this, and the Supreme Court held that the writ jurisdiction of the High Court is wide enough to be extended in the realm of torts in matters of granting compensation to a victim who has suffered personal injuries at the hands of officers of the government. So here what the court held was that there is no harm or there is no limitation in the court's power to grant compensation to victims of sexual harassment. And the tort law can also be included in the realm of sexual harassment, or in cases of rapes also, to grant compensation. So this case made it clear that sexual harassment can also fall under the domain of torts. By this, and the very simple conclusion of this discussion is that yes, sexual harassment also can fall under the domain of torts, And which tort will it fall under? That will be the tort of trespass to persons. And you will be paid compensation for the damage or the bodily personal injury sufferings that you have suffered. Now, the idea of this presentation was to introduce to you the field of emerging torts. As we had discussed in the first class, that torts is an ever expanding and ever growing area of law. It is up to you to think and to read and discuss and argue whether it is appropriate to extend torts to the laws of cyber tort and sexual harassment torts, or whether it is overextension of the field of torts to areas where it is not necessary, because we already have laws for the same. Hence, it is necessary for you to think over it and to ponder. For any questions that you have, please mail me at shruti@mpdnlu.ac.in.